Hello and welcome to a new Houdini for Beginners tutorial. I think this is number 6. Yes, it's number 6. Today we will deal with the topic smoke. So here you can see a quick render for the thumbnail, and we will do a basic setup, and I will show you a little extra how to vect particles with smoke simulation. It's really simple, and let me just close this and erase the whole thing here. We start with geometry. Let's get a timeline back to 1. So we will start with a simple geometry container. We will rename that as first, so let's call it VDB smoke, or let's call it tutorial smoke, and I will make it round and give it a green color here. And we will dive inside in this container with you can dive inside with double click, or you can dive inside with I. And you can dive up a level with the U key. So we will dive inside in the tutorial underscore smoke container, and the basic principle about a smoke simulation is you will need first a source. So you need to source the fire, for example, or the smoke, and so on. So here are really cool PyroFX tools to simply create, for example, explosion, flames, wispy smoke, and so on. But we will build that from scratch, because I think that will give you a better understanding about the nodes, about the workflows, the workflow, and so on. We'll start with a simple sphere, so press tab or press right click and type in sphere. We'll place it down into the center. That's the basic parameters or the basic settings. We will make a polygon out of it, dial up the frequency a little bit so you will get more resolution, and I will dial down the uniform scale to 0.25 for now. We got now the source here, so we will source our smoke from this little sphere. So we can already get a null here and type, for example, in for sourcing. And now we will create this initial source. Press tab again and type pyro, and we will choose pyro source here, and it will require geometry to source from, so we will pipe our geometry, our sourcing geometry or polygonal sourcing geometry into the input here, and hit the display flag here, and you already can see that the pyro source will create some points, and you've got here on your parameter window, you've got, for example, source burn, source smoke, source color, source fuel. We will choose source smoke. So the pyro source will now create on the particles, will create a name attribute with a value of 1, temperature, density, and, for example, p-scale and group particles. I will choose a smaller particle separation for a higher resolution later. You can also do a volume scatter. So when you dial the particle separation down, you will get a much higher resolution, but I will now choose the surface scatter for now. So you can here use, for example, 0.05. So we've got our pyro source, but when we place down now a dot network and we will build up the smoke solver, nothing will happen, because we need to rasterize these attributes, and there is a handy node for that called volume rasterize attributes. We'll place the node down and connect it, and nothing will happen. This is because we don't initialize our attributes here. So we will go here and we will get the density and the temperature, for example. Then we can adjust our voxel size here to 0.05 and our particle scale on here to 1 maybe. And this is the initial sourcing setup. So we can place down a null again and call this out source smoke. So this is our source for the smoke here. This is our little setup, and this is our initial sphere. Another thing you can do, you can swap out a sphere with any geometry you like. So if you got, for example, a sphere with a displacement, so place down a mountain here, pipe that in, you will get a source too. So you can drive your source with different geometries. After that, we will place on a dot network, a dynamic network, hit the display flag, and dive inside. It's currently looks pretty empty. We will fill it up. We've currently got only the output. And first, what we need a smoke solver. This will initialize the smoke simulation and solve our simulation. And we will get an error here, not enough sources specified. We will need an object, and we will solve a smoke object, so we will need a smoke object here. So place down the smoke object. I will rename it to smoke, let's call it 01, smoke underscore 01, and pipe that into the left input. And now we can play, and you will see nothing, because we need to source our smoke from our initial sourcing volume. We'll press tab again and type volume source, grab that, pipe it into the right input, and the right input is the sourcing input. And with the sourcing input we can now specify the subpath by clicking on here, going to smoke and out source smoke. When we play now, there is nothing, because we need to go here to sync, for example, and then source smoke again, so we will initialize the attributes. We've currently got 3 attributes, and we initialized 2 of them. We initialized density and temperature. Velocity, we will deal later with that. So now when you play, you can see that we've got an uprising simulation here. We can dial down our division size a little bit, and we will place a gas resize fluid dynamic. Gas resize fluid dynamic, pipe it into the pre-solve, and disable the max bounds. And now you can see we've got a uprising, pretty simple smoke simulation that looks pretty cool in the end. So you can already create a little rendering with that, but that's really basic. But there are different parameters, and For example, there is of course the time scale, so you can do a slow motion smoke simulation. There's temperature diffusion, so let's have a look at temperature diffusion. Dial in 5 for example. And you can see the simulation is much slower, and you will get these wrinkles here that will look pretty cool. Then there is the viscosity. Maybe you will already know it from fluids. So the viscosity of smoke, you can play with that, and you can get with viscosity in a smoke simulation. You can get really cool dynamics, but currently we don't got any velocity. So let's dial the viscosity back to 0. Okay, let's get a temperature diffusion back, and we will now source some velocities, and we will do that with a simple WOP. We've got here our sphere here, so let's dial the frequency up to maybe 20, and we will place down a point warp. And with the point warp we can bring some velocities to life, so create them, and let's call this create V for velocity. We will dive inside with double click, and we can for example create them with a constant, really simple constant free float vector, pipe that here into V for velocity, and then for example XYZ, let's go for the Z direction to 1, so we initialized the velocities here. If you don't see them in your viewport, let me just delete them here. Go on your node, go on the little node info button and click on V, and you can see the initial velocities. When we now play the simulation, it's basically the same, because we didn't specify them into the pyro source and into the volume rasterize. So on the pyro source we will now press this little plus here to add another attribute instance, and we can choose here velocity, V for velocity. On the volume rasterize attributes we can also do that, so attributes we want to rasterize is V, so let's get V included in here also, and now you can see we've got density, temperature and velocity. And now when we place the simulation, nothing will happen because we need something will happen because we've already created the volume source, and we get the initial attributes with the preset, and because we did that we already will inherit the velocity here. So here's already the velocity, and you can see the smoke will basically get a little push in that direction. We can make that of course stronger, for example go with the scale to 5, so you can play with the scale. But I think that's a little bit lame. So what we can do, we can use a noise for the velocity. Let's get a simple anti-alias noise here, pipe the anti-alias noise into the position, and we'll need a 3D noise, and we need to fit that. The fitting, because an anti-alias noise got an output from -0.5 to 0.5, so when you click on the little question mark here, the Houdini help menu will pop up. And I think for every noise, so let's get noise, anti-aliased flow noise, anti-aliased noise cellular, flow noise, turbulent noise, curl noise, pyro noise, and so on. I think in the help menu is the range declared, so you can look that up. And now we need to fit that, so pipe it into the fit, and I want to fit it from minus 0.5 to 0.5 between, let's go from -1 to 1 and pipe that into V for velocity. And you will see the velocity visualizer here, and of course we can now play with the roughness, we can play with the octaves. Let's get them to 1 and get the roughness down to 0.35 for example. And you can play with basically any noise, that's fully up to you. So we will dive out and let's have a look at our smoke simulation. Oh yeah, let's do another thing. Place down a DOP import field, and with the DOP import field we can import the simulated fields out of the DOPNet. Select it, drag and drop the DOPNet on the DOP network, or you can choose it manually, that's fully up to you. Here are some presets, but we will get the smoke manually out of there. So fields to import, press plus, object. The object will be our smoke _01. So smoke _01, and field we want to import, and this is the density field. And now you can see we need to scale it a little bit up here, so maybe to 5. Let's dive out and play the simulation back. And now you can see our created velocity will of course affect the simulation here. And now you can play, for example, with the buoyancy lift. To not create this strong lifting effect, to more get like a zero gravity or maybe ink in water effect. So of course you can pull that down. Or you can basically change it to 0. You can play with the viscosity here. Buoyancy lift. Let's let's just get it to 0, or let it be 0 and simulate it a little bit. And of course, after the DOP import fields, you can place down a convert VDB, and we will convert that to a VDB. And we only need, I think, density for redshift, or you can also, I think, source the color. But I will do that in another tutorial. And here's our pretty simple and basic smoke simulation. Of course you can now dial that down to 0.01 and here to 0.01, and the smoke 0.01 to get a much more better representation or a higher resolution from your smoke geometry. Of course it will take longer, but I think when you got a scene with like fine details and close-up shots, it's worth it. But when you got like a scene like you've got like a hero object in the front, and you've got fine smoke in the end, a little bit out of focus. I think yes. Then you can of course dial the simulation resolution down. Another good note is the volume visualization. We'll place it down and get a density field in here, and you can rise up the density field so you can have a look how your smoke will turn out. Cool. So that is currently frame number. Let's go for frame number 35 and place down a time shift. With the time shift node we can basically freeze frames, and we will freeze this current frame, so delete channels, and when you now scrub the timeline nothing will happen. We will basically stay on the frame 35. Now to pop advect particles, we will do that. That's a pretty, I think powerful way to art direct particles with smoke, because when you know what to do, you can direct the smoke and then direct the particles, and I find it pretty powerful, especially for VFX and motion design. So we've got our initial simple time shift here, and we will place down a null and call it maybe out V. Okay. Let's get another underscore and call it pop. There is a way, of course, to visualize our volume, our velocity field. So let's get another one here, and I want to source the V field, vel, for velocity. And now we source our velocity field, so you can see here velocity x, y, z, and the density. So we don't need the density, so we can blast the density field away for now. Density, and then delete non-selected. Oh no, we will blast away the density, and we will be left with the field here. You can, I think you can also VDB vector merge them. Well, I think there is a way. Oh, we need to first convert that into a VDB. So grab that, convert it to a VDB here, and then we'll do the VDB vector merge. VDB vector merge, and you've got one initial VDB velocity field. And to visualize that field, you can place down a scatter, and you will scatter into the volume, for example, and you will need a volume trail, and you pipe the scatter into the points to trail input and the required velocity volume into the velocity volume, and you can see now we can visualize here the beauty of a vector field. So you can also resample the lines and then render that out, because you will get a pretty woven intricate details, and I think that's pretty hard to do sometimes just with a simple pop simulation and maybe a pop wind. So to create that with a pop simulation, I think you need to do first pop it by volume, so a volume field, but a volume field or a vector volume field you can also set up with a non pyro simulation, but I can show you that in another video. But this kind of details here, I think it's pretty cool to give it a try and render them out as lines. You also can increase the trail length here, And the cool thing is you will get the color, so you can basically let Redshift or Octane or Mantra give the color, and you will see them on your lines here. So that's another cool thing, to render like this volume fields as lines. And now to the fun part with pops. I will place down a pop network, and I will place down, or just copy the sphere from above here, pipe that into the first input, so we will scatter our pops, our little points, on the sphere, and we will dive inside, and we will place down a pop advect by volumes, and we can use, for example, second context geometry. We will pipe that into the second context, and we will play our simulation here, and you can already see that the particles will get advected by our volume field. You can change that to update velocity, for example. You can change that to update force. You can dive up the velocity scale to get like really cool or really dynamic movement. But currently that's based on one single frame, of course. Let's choose that to 0.85, so raise it up a little bit, and I will dial down the division size here a little bit, so 0.05. And we will disable the time shift. And this is now basically the advection from our simulated velocity field get in real time advected by and the pops will get advected not by a single frame, they will get advected by the whole simulation timeline or frame range. So that's another thing you can do with smoke. And on top of the smoke simulation you can then build up a simple pop simulation, for example. Cool. And now we need to render that out. I will do that with Redshift. I will do a simple setup, so you can just get the basics and render it out. Let's get some frames simulated here. And convert it to a VDB. I think that looks pretty alright for the smoke simulation. So we've got here our smoke. Time check. Okay. We've got here our smoke currently, and we will place down a ROP network, a material network, call this RS mats and RS odds. Give it a red color because it's Redshift, and maybe an RS light and a camera. What do we else need? We need to set up the Redshift. So place down a Redshift custom into the RS out. Let's get global illumination to brute force, and the system enable automatic sampling for now, and optics RT on supported GPUs. So if you got an RTX GPU, you can use the RTX acceleration for faster rendering. And the RS mats. So this basically pretty simple, so we place down our RS material builder and call it RS, let's call it smoke. And the cool thing is we can just delete this and get an RS volume. RS volume, and pipe that into the volume. So that's basically the shader, and now we need to assign the shader to the render. So you can either press Shift W to get a little side tree up here and just drag and drop it in here, or you can just choose it with the operator chooser. So the material is also set. Then we need to get our light here. I will choose a round light, so disk, let's make it like that. And we need to, really important step, we need to scale up the contribution scale for volumes. If you don't do that, you will see nothing. Go into the camera, lock the camera, important, and then we can get in here. Let's turn the visible thing off, and we'll start rendering here. And you can already see we've got our smoke. There are some parameters you can, of course, influence and manipulate. For example, you can play with the color channel, you can dial their temperature or density, you can play with the absorption scale. I think that's pretty cool to get like thick smoke. And wait, let's get another simple simulation started. So we've toggled that. We can of course manipulate our velocities. Let's get them pretty big, so something like that. So a pretty low frequency. And what we can do, I will dial back the buoyancy a little bit. And where's it currently? Okay. And we can simulate that, of course. What we can do, let's dial that a little bit up to make it a little bit faster. And of course we currently see both fields, so we see the velocity field and the density field, but we can delete the density field, the velocity field, of course. So blast away not density, so delete non-selected. And now we can have another look on the rendering. And for that we also can just currently disable the well and increase the resolution again, 0.01, and I think that should be fine for now. So I simulated that a little bit here, and now we can see we've got pretty detailed smoke here. And of course you can make a two lighting setup, just a quick lighting setup here, or you can go with the pop way and make a cool particle simulation out of that. Let's get one light here. Oh wait, it's the rim. Let's get one light here. And we'll get another light from the left side. We'll get that exposure down to -2. And the color, for example, an orange color. Oh, that was... That's 5. No, that's way too high. And now you can, of course, experiment with, for example, the absorption. So when you dial it up, you will get like this really thick smoke. And of course, when you dial it down, you will get the opposite. And now, of course, you can play with your camera. You can introduce a little bit of depth of field here, copy parameter, paste relative reference 0.25. So that's fully up to you, and this is way too saturated. And you can basically shade and light, do a look depth, lighting setup, or look depth then for your particle simulation or for the smoke simulation. For your simple smoke simulation here, another cool thing is like what you can do. You can just transform it one time. And you can move it like that, turn it 180 degrees and merge both together, and you will get 180 asymmetrical mirror, and you can render that out. So no, don't simulate it. Okay. So you can just mirror it and give it a little bit more volume or a little bit more detail. But of course that's fully up to you. So I hope you liked that simple smoke tutorial. When you post it on Instagram, you can tag me. I will have a look and of course give it a like. Yeah, there's soon new courses coming up. I'm working harder on them, so 2 or 3 courses soon in the next month, and of course new tutorials, new Patreon. So currently I released a Patreon tutorial today. It's about all pops, so how to set up a particle simulation, how to influence them, and so on. But I hope you liked that simple beginner tutorial, and I will see you in the next one. So stay safe and have a nice day.